My name is Chloe Stewart. I'm 26 years old, and my mother texted me, "Come home and apologize. We'll let you stay here, and we'll help you find a job." Less than an hour after another company rejected me. That was the moment I stopped pretending the pattern was random. Too many interviews had gone well before suddenly collapsing. Too many recruiters sounded interested, then disappeared. Too many hiring managers changed their tone right after asking a few routine questions. I wasn't losing jobs because I lacked skill. I was losing them because somebody was getting to people before I did. And the worst part was that it wasn't a stranger. It was my own family. My sister had convinced my parents to call places I applied to and tell them I had a criminal record I do not have. No arrest, no charge, no secret past. Just a lie, repeated in careful voices until it sounded believable. They didn't break my future with one dramatic act. They did it with phone calls, concern, and the kind of betrayal that hides behind the word love. The damage wasn't just professional, it got inside my head. Every rejection made me question my talent, my resume, my portfolio, my choices, my sanity. I started wondering whether I really was naive, unstable, too idealistic, too ambitious, too difficult. That's what control does when it's done well. It doesn't just block doors, it teaches you to blame yourself for the lock. Then, in the middle of a normal afternoon, a woman I had never seen before stepped in front of me, pressed an envelope into my hand, and said, "Your grandmother hired me 5 years ago to find you and help you escape what's being done to you." I opened it, read the first lines, and felt my whole body go cold, because suddenly this wasn't just family sabotage. It was a plan. It had been running for years. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and what happened when I walked back into that house, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The woman told me not to read everything in public. "First page only," she said. "The rest when you're somewhere safe." That sentence alone told me more than enough. Safe from who? I stepped aside, opened the envelope, and recognized my grandmother's handwriting instantly. The first line hit me like a slap. "Chloe, if this letter has reached you, then I was right to fear they would keep you dependent until you no longer recognized your own life." I read it again, slower. Then came the next line. "Your sister has been tracking your applications, your calls, and your movements more closely than you know. Your parents may tell themselves they are helping. They are not." I stopped breathing for a second. My grandmother hadn't written that out of suspicion. She had written it because she knew. Attached to the letter was a printed document titled "Confirmed Employer Contacts." Under it were company names, dates, times, and brief summaries of what had been said. 17 employers. 17. My mother was listed on several calls. My sister was listed on even more. The phrases repeated in different forms: family concerns, troubling history, behavioral issues. There may be legal problems. And on 2 lines that made my stomach drop: "She has a criminal record." Below the log was another note from my grandmother. "Mia does not want Chloe. She wants Charlotte, the obedient, frightened version of you she can manage." That sentence explained years of confusion in one brutal instant. They didn't want me safe. They wanted me controllable. Every time I applied for a job in another city, every time I talked about freelance contracts, every time I sounded excited about building a life that didn't revolve around that house, my sister found a way to drag me back into doubt. Suddenly, old moments rearranged themselves into evidence. The company that ghosted me after my sister casually asked for the hiring manager's name, just to celebrate. The recruiter who stopped replying after my mother offered to be helpful if references were needed. The studio that loved my portfolio until the morning after a tense family dinner where I mentioned relocating. None of it had been bad luck. It had been interference. I opened the next set of pages and found transcript excerpts from recorded calls. My grandmother had hired a private investigator 5 years earlier because she noticed patterns in how my sister talked about me, interrupted my plans, and reshaped family narratives around my choices. One transcript showed my sister telling my mother, "Concerned mothers are believable. If they think Chloe has a record, they won't risk hiring her." Another line was even worse. "If she gets a real job, she's gone. If she's gone, we lose control." I stared at those words until they blurred. Do you know what it feels like when the people who raised you don't just mistrust you, but actively design your dependence? It doesn't feel loud. It feels precise. It feels like years of confusion suddenly turning into structure. At the bottom of the page, my grandmother had underlined one sentence twice. When a family starts calling domination love, ask yourself what else they have renamed. I folded the papers back into the envelope, knowing one thing with complete certainty. I was done wondering whether I had imagined any of it. I had proof now, and proof changes everything. As I walked home, my phone buzzed with a message from the investigator. She had sent one audio file and one sentence. Listen before you confront them. I stopped, put in my earbuds, and pressed play. My sister's voice came through first, calm and confident. "I called the studio myself. Mom handled two of them better than I did. She sounds worried. That's what works." My mother gave a small laugh in the background. Then my sister said the sentence that killed any last trace of mercy in me. "If employers think Chloe has legal baggage, they'll back off. She'll stop chasing this graphic design fantasy and stay close where she belongs." I lowered the phone and stared ahead. That was not fear. That was not misguided love. That was strategy. A few seconds later, my mother asked, "What if she finds out?" My sister answered, "Then we say we were protecting her. Dad will back us if we keep it about safety." That was when the last piece clicked into place. They didn't just sabotage me. They had rehearsed the excuse they would use if I ever caught them. I opened the rest of the envelope and found a flash drive, a legal statement from my grandmother's attorney, and a second letter marked, "Read after the audio." In that letter, my grandmother warned me exactly how the confrontation would go. She wrote that my sister would become calm first, then offended, then tearful only when she started losing control. She wrote that my mother would talk about sacrifice, fear, and family. She wrote that my father would try to smooth things over without naming what had actually happened, and then she gave me something far more powerful than validation. She gave me leverage. Part of her estate had been placed under trust management, and she had added a clause stating that if any beneficiary used fraud, coercion, or reputational sabotage to block another beneficiary's independence, their access could be suspended pending review. My sister had been trying to control my job search while quietly positioning herself around money she assumed I'd never be strong enough to protect. On the flash drive were employer summaries, call logs, screenshots of messages, and a folder labeled Employer Packet. Clean, organized evidence designed to clear my name quickly. That folder changed me. Up to that point, I was angry. After seeing it, I became focused. Revenge stopped meaning emotional confrontation and started meaning consequence. I backed everything up to the cloud, forwarded copies to a private email, and sent one message to the investigator. If anything goes wrong tonight, loop in the attorney immediately. Then I turned on the voice recorder on my phone before I stepped inside my parents' house. The television was on. Dinner smelled normal. Plates clinked. The scene was so ordinary it was insulting. My sister sat at the dining table with her laptop open. She looked up, saw my face, and didn't even pretend. "What?" she said. I set the envelope on the table between us. "We need to talk." For the first time in years, I was not asking for permission to be heard. I was bringing evidence. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway as soon as she heard my tone. "What's going on?" she asked. I didn't answer. I took out my phone, placed it on the table, and pressed play. My sister's voice filled the room. Concerned mothers are believable. My mother went pale so fast it was almost hard to watch. My sister stood up immediately. "Turn that off." I didn't. I let the whole recording play. The part about employers backing off if they thought I had legal trouble. The part about my mother handling the calls well. The part about me staying close, where I belonged. The part about using protection as the excuse if I ever found out. When it ended, silence hit the room like a wall. Then I slid the printed call logs across the table. 17 companies, I said. You contacted 17 companies and told lies about me. Want me to read the dates out loud? My mother whispered my name like she was the injured one. I cut her off. No. Don't say my name gently now. Not after attaching it to fake criminal claims behind my back. My sister recovered first, because of course she did. You don't understand the full context, she said. I laughed once. Then explain the context where telling employers I have a criminal record becomes loving. She tried another angle. You were making reckless decisions. You were trying to leave with no savings, no support system, no stable plan. I fired back immediately. Applying for jobs is not reckless. Building a career is not a fantasy. Telling employers I'm dangerous is not protection. My mother stepped in, saying, "We were worried about you." I opened my grandmother's letter and read aloud. Your sister's greatest skill is persuasion. Your mother will call domination concern. Then I placed the attorney's statement on the table and watched my sister's face tighten. Grandma knew, I said. She hired an investigator 5 years ago. She documented everything, and she put legal protections in place in case one of you used sabotage to control me. My sister ignored everything except the part she cared about. What protections? She asked. I looked straight at her. Exactly. That's your first question. Not whether it's true, not whether I'm okay, not whether Grandma knew. You want to know what happens to the money? That exposed something my parents had spent years refusing to see. My mother started crying. My father walked in halfway through it, sensed disaster, and tried to stabilize the room before he even understood it. I made him listen to the audio. He looked sick by the end, but even then he reached for the same predictable line. We need to calm down. My grandmother had predicted that too. No, I said. What you need to do is stop treating peace like a substitute for accountability. Then I placed a screenshot from my sister's messages in front of them. It showed her asking an HR acquaintance to flag Chloe's profile informally if it came through because the family had concerns. My mother stared at it and whispered, "Did you do that?" My sister answered with the arrogance of someone who still thought she could out-explain evidence. I was handling something the rest of you were too weak to handle. That was the moment the mask slipped completely. I leaned forward and asked the question she couldn't answer. What do you call it when your own sister is the first person to tell employers you're dangerous? What do you call it when the people who say they love you need you unemployed to feel secure? Nobody answered, because by then, even they knew the truth had started moving faster than their excuses. Once the evidence was on the table, the power in that room shifted hard. My father read the attorney's statement in silence. My mother sat down like her legs had given out. My sister stayed standing because standing made her feel larger, but even she could tell she was losing the script. I said exactly what I wanted. Tonight, I get written admissions from both of you. No one contacts any employer, recruiter, landlord, or friend connected to me again. And Mia writes down every company she called, every person she used, every message she sent, every favor she asked for. My sister stared at me like I had become someone unfamiliar. You're unbelievable, she said. No, I answered. I was unbelievable when I kept forgiving this family without proof. This version of me is just informed. My father looked up from the document and asked, "What happens if we refuse?" I met his eyes. "Then I send everything to the trust attorney, every employer involved, and me as company." I. That finally got my sister's full attention. She made the mistake that destroyed her. Instead of apologizing, she escalated. "If she leaves this house," she snapped, pointing at me, "she should know she won't get a cent from Grandma's money while she runs around trying to be independent." My father turned to her slowly. My mother stopped crying long enough to look terrified. I lifted the clause in the attorney's statement. "You might want to read this again," I said. "If a beneficiary uses fraud, coercion, or reputational sabotage to block another's independence, access can be frozen pending formal review." My sister's face changed. For the first time that night, she looked genuinely frightened. But even then, she couldn't stop herself. "She would have failed," she said. "She always lives in ideas. She has no idea what real life costs. If she left, she would blow through her money, fall apart, and come crawling back." I stopped that. That speech told me everything. She did not think she had harmed me. She thought she had the right to decide what kind of life I was allowed to attempt. I played another audio clip from the flash drive. In it, my sister said, "If Chloe becomes independent, she'll start asking questions about the trust, and I'm not letting her throw that away, too." My father looked at her with disgust. This was also about money. My sister crossed her arms and said, "It was about protecting family assets." That was the moment the whole room understood what she really was. Not a worried sister, not an overprotective daughter, a gatekeeper, a manager of dependence, a person who had built her identity around deciding which version of my life was acceptable. I asked her one last time, "Did you want me safe, or did you want me stuck?" She didn't answer directly. She just whispered, "You were not supposed to find out like this." That sentence told the truth more clearly than any apology could have. She never meant to stop. She just assumed I'd stay confused long enough for the sabotage to become my reality. My father finally said, "You'll give Chloe everything she asked for." My sister turned on him. "You're taking her side?" He answered, "I'm taking the side that hasn't been lying." That was when she started crying. Not from remorse, but from the shock of losing control. "If you send anything to my employer," she said to me, "you'll ruin my life." I looked at her without flinching. "You already taught me how that works." By midnight, I had forced the truth into writing. My mother's statement came first because she broke first. Her hands were shaking so badly she misspelled my name on the first page and had to start over. In that statement, she admitted that she had contacted prospective employers and repeated false claims about me based on family concerns that were not true. She tried to soften it with phrases about fear and misunderstanding, but I stopped her and made her rewrite the key lines until they were clear. I was not allowing vague language to save anyone that night. My father signed as a witness, and for the first time since I had walked in, he looked like he understood that this was no longer a family argument he could smooth over with a tired speech about peace. This was evidence. This was a record. This was the beginning of consequences. My sister fought harder. She kept saying I was being vindictive, dramatic, unstable, and cruel, which was almost impressive considering the amount of proof sitting in front of her. She tried to write around what she had done instead of naming it. She wrote that she had voiced concerns and discouraged hiring decisions because she believed I was unprepared for independence. I slid the page back to her and said, "Try again." She glared at me and said, "You can't force me to confess to your version." I answered, "I don't need your confession. I already have the recordings. What I'm giving you is a chance to stop making this worse." My father looked at her and said quietly, "Write it." That shook her more than my threats had. She was used to him excusing her. She was not used to him withdrawing cover. The second version was still careful, but it was enough. She admitted to contacting employers, presenting false impressions of legal or behavioral risk, and influencing hiring outcomes against me. She signed it with a hand that was trembling from rage, not regret. Then I asked for something she did not expect me to insist on with that much force. Now give me every company name, every recruiter, every contact, every person you used, every message you sent, and every number you called. She laughed right in my face. No. I opened my laptop, logged into the cloud folder from the flash drive, and started reading screenshots aloud. One company, then another, then the message to the HR classmate asking for an informal flag, then the note about my mother sounding more believable on calls because she sounded concerned, not bitter. Then the reminder my sister had typed to herself after one interview of mine, call before background stage, easier to stop earlier. The color drained from her face little by little. She realized I was not guessing. I was not accusing. I was verifying. My father leaned forward, looked at her, and said, "Give her the list." This time she did. We sat there for nearly an hour while she wrote down names and details. 17 businesses, 2 recruiters, 1 former classmate in HR, 1 family acquaintance who knew people in hiring, 1 church contact who agreed to pass along informal warnings. Every name she wrote felt like another bone setting back into place inside me. For months I had been trying to understand why my efforts kept dying in silence. Now the silence had a map. Once she finished, she threw the pen down and said, "Happy now?" I looked at the pages, stacked them neatly, and said, "No, but I'm finally done being confused." That answer made her angrier than if I had shouted. She wanted emotion she could dismiss. What she got instead was structure. Then I opened the folder my grandmother and the investigator had prepared for me, the employer packet. Every file inside was clean, organized, and devastating. There were summaries of false interference, redacted evidence, call logs, and a short professional explanation stating that defamatory statements had been made about me by relatives attempting to block my employment without my consent or knowledge. I customized each email with company names, dates, and relevant attachments. My mother started crying again and saying, "Please don't do this tonight." My father said, "Sleep on it." My sister said, "If you send those, there's no coming back." I didn't even look up right away. I just kept typing. When I finally did, I said, "You should have thought about that before you told people I had a criminal record." My sister came around the table and lowered her voice, trying one last manipulative tone. "Chloe, listen to me. Families survive ugly things by keeping them inside the family." I pressed send on the first batch while holding her gaze. "No," I said. "Families like ours survive by burying the truth under guilt." Then I sent the second batch, then the third. Calmly, completely. One company after another received the truth she had worked so hard to contaminate. That should have been enough. In another version of the story, maybe it would have been. But there was one more document in the folder, and the second I saw it again, I knew I was going to use it. It was a prepared report to the Ethics and Compliance Department at my sister's company. At first, I had hesitated, because sending it would move this from personal revenge to professional collapse. Then I remembered the message where she had asked an HR contact to flag me informally. I remembered her leveraging credibility, relationships, and the appearance of authority to poison my chances. I remembered every rejection that arrived without explanation while she sat across from me at dinner, asking fake sympathetic questions about how my job search was going. She didn't just lie as a sister. She weaponized professional networks and hiring influence. That was not private. That was not family business. That was misconduct. My father saw the subject line on the draft and immediately went rigid. "Chloe," he said, "you've already made your point." I turned to him and answered, "No, I'm making sure she never does this to anyone else." My sister stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. "If you send that, I could lose my job." I stood too. "And when you made me lose mine before I even had one, what exactly was that supposed to teach me? Gratitude?" She started crying harder then, but not with remorse. It was panic now, real and ugly, because she finally understood what accountability feels like when it is no longer theoretical. "Please," she said, "please don't." My mother moved toward her. My father tried once more with, "Let's just take a breath." I shook my head. "You had years to breathe while she kept doing this." Then I attached the screenshots, the written statements, the call summaries, and the note about improper use of professional influence, and I hit send. The silence afterward was worse than any screaming match could have been. My sister stared at me as if I had crossed some line she never imagined I would be strong enough to cross. "You ruined me," she whispered. I picked up the signed statements and slid them into my folder. "No," I said. "You built this. I just stopped protecting you from it." That was the exact moment my phone buzzed. One of the employers had already responded. The message was short and direct. They thanked me for clarifying the situation, said they were reviewing the material, and asked whether I would be available for a call the next afternoon because they wanted to reopen my application. I read it once, then again, just to feel what it was like when the truth started working faster than the lie. My sister saw my face change and asked, "What happened?" I looked at her and said, "One of them wrote back." She actually went pale. That was the first time that night she looked afraid of something bigger than exposure. She looked afraid of me getting my life back. After that, I stopped talking unless I needed something specific. I scanned every written admission with my phone. I emailed copies to myself, the investigator, and the attorney listed in my grandmother's file. I uploaded duplicates to the cloud. I made sure nothing that happened next could erase what had already been documented. My mother followed me upstairs while I packed a bag and kept crying, saying, "Please don't leave like this." I folded clothes without looking at her and said, "I'm not leaving like this. I'm leaving because of this." She tried to say she was still my mother. I stopped packing for 1 second, turned to her, and answered, "Tonight you were her accomplice." She cried harder, but I had nothing left to soften. On my way out, I passed my sister's room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, phone in both hands, waiting for consequences to arrive. She looked up at me and said, "I never thought you'd actually fight back." I adjusted the strap of my bag and said, "That was your biggest mistake." Then I walked out of the house with the envelope, the evidence, and the first real sense of direction I had felt in months. The next morning, the fallout started exactly where it should have, with the truth moving faster than the lie. 3 employers responded before noon. 2 reopened my applications. 1 apologized directly for acting on unverifiable claims and asked whether I was still interested in interviewing. I said yes. That same morning, the investigator called to confirm that the trust review had been triggered. My grandmother's clause was real. My sister's access and influence were frozen pending inquiry. She could not hide behind family structure anymore. At the same time, my parents started calling and texting, asking me not to make things public, asking me to handle it privately, asking me to think about what this will do to the family. I ignored all of it. The family had already done what it was willing to do for itself. I was finally doing something for me. My first reopened interview happened that afternoon with a branding agency I had loved from the beginning. The creative director admitted they had received urgent personal warnings framed as credible and had hesitated because of them. After reviewing my evidence, they wanted to reconsider. I showed them my portfolio, answered every question cleanly, and heard my own voice return in real time. Later that evening, my father left a voicemail saying my sister's company had placed her on administrative leave pending an internal ethics review. He said it like he wanted me to feel guilty. I didn't. It wasn't happening because I was vindictive. It was happening because she had used manipulation professionally as well as personally, and the evidence finally reached people who had the power to act on it. By the second day, 2 more employers had reopened discussions with me. By the third, the branding agency invited me to a second interview, and another recruiter called to revisit a role that had unexpectedly stalled. I knew exactly why it had stalled. I just also knew now that sabotage collapses fast when documented properly. The trust attorney sent me another letter from my grandmother, one that had been sealed unless a pattern of interference with my independence was confirmed. In it, she wrote, "Do not waste your future proving your goodness to people who required your weakness in order to feel strong." That line stayed with me. I signed a lease on a small studio apartment within a week. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic. It was mine. My mother came to the hotel once, crying, explaining, saying she thought the calls were warnings and not destruction, saying she was afraid of losing me. I listened and asked one question. When I kept getting rejected and smaller and more ashamed, did you ever wonder if the plan was working too well? She said yes. That was enough for me to close the door. My father sent a long email about healing, but he avoided words like fraud, sabotage, and defamation, so I replied with boundaries instead of emotion. My sister sent one final message after her company terminated her. "Are you happy now? I lost everything?" I answered with the only truthful line possible. "No. I got back what you tried to take." A week later, I accepted a contract role with the branding agency, with strong potential to turn full-time. My career restarted the same week hers collapsed under the weight of the tactics she had used on mine. I made one public post on LinkedIn about hidden employment sabotage and how reputational lies can come from the people closest to you. I did not name her. I didn't need to. Then I told a shorter version of the story on TikTok, and the comments flooded with people describing parents ruining leases, siblings opening mail, relatives calling bosses, and families disguising control as care. That was when I understood how common this kind of betrayal really is. My sister eventually left New Orleans. My mother kept apologizing. My father kept trying to make the damage sound mutual. The trust review stayed open. But none of that changed the outcome that mattered most. She had tried to trap me in shame, dependency, and self-doubt. Instead, I walked out with evidence, reopened my career, triggered legal consequences, reclaimed my future, and watched the person who sabotaged my life lose the very stability she used to lecture me about. So let me ask you this. What would you do if the person destroying your future wasn't a stranger, but the family member smiling while they closed every door behind your back? Comment your real story below. I'm reading every comment. At Revenge Argon, our team works hard to create meaningful and engaging stories for our audience. We are committed to making it clear that these are fictional stories, created to share educational lessons, positive values, and thought-provoking messages with viewers. The villain in this story is especially disturbing because the betrayal comes from someone who should have offered love and protection, not control and destruction. Her actions show how jealousy, manipulation, and greed can quietly ruin another person's life. If you were in Chloe's place, how would you deal with a villain like this? Would you forgive her, expose her, or walk away for good?